a loved one, but if you did, would you be willing to donate their organs? Well, tomorrow MPs will debate proposals to move to a system where it's presumed people's organs will be donated unless they've actively opted out of it. Well, a new poll shows around 3/4 of the population, that's 74%, are in favour of the plans, and here's why. At any one time, around 6,300 are on the transplant waiting list, and for many, the wait is just too long. Last year, just under 500 people died while waiting for the organ that would keep them alive. And in 2015, 5 News ran a series on organ donation, and I've been looking back at it. James Eyre needed new lungs to survive cystic fibrosis. He'd never know who donated their organs, but he is forever grateful.
All I can say to them is thank you, because I'm 41 years old. I've got a child of 10 and twins of 5. And as long as everything goes well, I'm going to be able to be with them. And they sadly lost their loved one, but they've given my children their dad back. How can you say thank you enough?
David Caulfield's liver cirrhosis was caused by alcohol abuse. 2 years after sobriety, he received a liver transplant and will never jeopardise his health again.
It's such a blessed gift, and every day I pinch myself. Every time I look at my wife, I pinch myself. Every time I hold my grandchildren. The love I have for my donor and his family is tremendous, because I'm the luckiest man in the world.
For others, donating an organ is an entirely altruistic act. No one died to save Mike Benson's life. For his donor, a complete stranger, it was a simple decision.
I got a kidney I didn't need. It's Baldor obvious, isn't it? Really. I hope more people will see it like that. You just don't need 2 kidneys.
It's like winning the lottery. Better than winning a lottery, really, because you win your life back, really. And we met in London and I bought him a beer. So, I mean, it's the least I could do, I thought.
If it's a human being who's got a problem, if there's suffering involved and shortening of life and whatever, I mean, get in there and do what you can. Don't dither. You know, you've only got one life, and we should all try and do something for humanity before we finally die.
Mike Benson ending that piece. And as we saw there, the willingness of people to agree to donate the organs of a loved one is very difficult. In those difficult circumstances is at the heart of this. And the parents of Jemima Lazell faced such a dilemma. Jemima was just 13 when she died of a brain aneurysm. But by donating her organs, Jemima went on to save the lives of 8 people, the highest number to receive organs from a single donor. Well, earlier I spoke to Jemima's mum, and I began by asking her when she had that difficult conversation about organ donation with her daughter.
It was a very sort of fleeting conversation, purely because somebody we knew had been in a position where they had wanted to donate, but hadn't actually been able to because of the circumstances of their death. And we hadn't realised that you have to be in a particular condition to be able to do so. So that's what prompted it. And Jemima and Amelia had never heard of any such thing before, and were both quite surprised to hear, you know, that one bits from someone can go into somebody else. But once they'd digested the information, Jemima made it very clear that she thought it was a really positive and wonderful thing.
Nonetheless, of course, it was still a very difficult decision for you to make.
Yes, no, it is, because you're being forced to acknowledge that this is final, and also it's quite a drawn-out process. That you have to have, she had to be declared brainstem dead first, and then the organ donation team approach you and they go through each item. So it's quite a long process, and you have to consider everything very carefully, and it is quite difficult. But you know, obviously knowing how she felt, it was that much easier for us.
And Jemima, of course, went on to save 8 people's lives, 5 of them children. I mean, how does that make you feel, your daughter giving the gift of life to so many people?
Yes, it's remarkable and wonderful, and for us, the grieving process doesn't end, it changes, but knowing that she's done such a wonderful thing, it, for us, is a little bit of light in the dark, and for parents who may be in a similar situation, I would say please consider it. It's a remarkably comforting way of remembering your child, and to think that they can live on in doing something so positive. You know, it's a really wonderful legacy.
Indeed, definitely a legacy for Jemima. Sophie Lazelka talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get more now on that. Joining me is Edwin Yanwa. Now, he received a kidney from his sister 7 years ago. Ali Golian is also with us. He donated a kidney to his former teacher. And lastly, joining us is Claire Willamant. She's from the NHS Blood and Transplant. And thank you all for joining me tonight. Really, really big issue and a really big debate that's going on tomorrow at Westminster. Ali, I'm going to start with yourself. As I said, you donated your kidney to a teacher, so it wasn't a complete stranger, but still you weren't in, let's say, regular contact with your teacher.
No, I hadn't seen her for 5 years, and I saw it on Facebook, but her sister put up a post, and I got in touch with her, and she said she had renal failure, and we started the testing, and we were a match.
Why is that? How can it go from looking on Facebook and you see a message regarding your teacher you haven't spoken to for a few years? How do you go from that to actually, let me see what I can do, what role I could play in potentially donating an organ?
She was an excellent teacher, and
yes, you'd have to be, wouldn't she? Really?
And it was something my heart told me to do it. I just wanted to see if I could help.
And what is it like? What's life like now in terms of your health, your well-being? I mean, that is a concern when people are donating any part of their body, particularly if they're obviously alive and they're going to be living afterwards. What is your life like?
I'm back to normal, and I just want to raise awareness that it's not as bad as it seems, and you can have a perfectly normal life. And I'm doing everything I was doing before.
And Ali, you said that that the person you donated your kidney to, she's like a sister to you. When it comes to you, Edwin, it was your sister, your actual sister, who saved your life. You wouldn't be here potentially if not for her.
Yeah, I'm very lucky to have my sister. She donated her kidney to me just under 7 years ago, and that was an amazing thing for her to do for me while I was ill.
Because it's very interesting when you look at the figures concerning ethnic minorities, particularly black Africans, there's a longer waiting list. So, for example, for a black patient waiting for a kidney, say, they could potentially be waiting a year longer than a white patient.
Yeah, and we were actually conscious of that. Myself and my family were conscious of that, and it was a consideration of ours, and it was great that my sister could sort of step up and go through the tests, and I'm obviously going to be forever grateful for that.
I mean, what was life like just waiting for that donor? When you found out that you had this issue, had this problem, what did doctors tell you?
Doctors had sort of told me in advance of when my renal failure struck that I would potentially need an organ transplant at some point, and we tried to sort of prepare for that, and luckily a few members of my family sort of went through the testing, and my sister turned out to be the best match, so we went ahead and went through the process, and luckily it was successful for us.
I mean, Claire, Edwin's story just really sums up the situation for many people from whatever backgrounds. And as I said earlier, there's more than 6,300 people waiting for an organ transplant. Over the last 10 years, we've had, around more than 400 people, more than 4,000 people die waiting for a donor. What is the situation exactly? What more can you tell us?
And so you're right, and it's absolutely tragic that around 3 people every day die in need of a transplant. And within NHS Blood and Transplant, what we try to do is make sure that we identify as many donors as possible, give the option of organ donation as often as possible. But the other key thing for us to do is to raise awareness amongst the general public and get people talking about what they want to do about organ donation, because we know that when people are very clear that they want to be an organ donor, particularly if they sign on to the organ donor register, their families will honour that decision, and nearly all families will allow organ donation to go ahead if it's very clear what their loved one wanted. The issue is if it's not clear, if people haven't made it clear what they wanted, then it leaves the family at a time of tremendous grief, having to make a difficult decision.
I mean, obviously we've got some great stories here, fantastic positive stories. However, people can be worried, they can be fearful if it comes to either themselves donating an organ, or indeed when it comes to donating the organs of their loved ones. What can you tell people in terms of it's not as scary as it might look or appear?
Well, as we've heard, for living donation, in my view, they're absolute heroes, all living donors, and particularly the altruistic ones that just donate to strangers are amazing, and you see how well they are, and it's not as scary as some people might think. But for deceased donation, for me, I think it's the last and the greatest gift that you can possibly give. And what I would say is that we treat people with the utmost dignity and respect. We make sure that we've got all the consent in place. We would never retrieve any organs without proper consent being in place. And the key is that you need to speak to people, and that's what makes it easier at a time of grief, is making the decision and letting, for yourself, what do you want to happen, and then making sure that that's clear.
I mean, Ali, how aware were you in regards to organ donation? You said you had to do some research when you saw your teacher needed this donation. How much did you actually know?
I didn't really know much. There was a great group on Facebook called Donate UK, and that's a group with living donors who've done it already. And I went on there and also did lots of research, and that's where it all started.
So, Edwin, do you think then that this opt-out system is the answer, or is it the case that maybe we just need to start having that difficult conversation about what we might do if a loved one passed away?
I think it's a combination of the two, to be honest. There's clearly a shortage of organs out there, and a good way to bridge the gap, I believe, will be to get the opt-out system in place. It will automatically sort of increase the potential donor population, because there's a lot of people out there who are probably very willing to give an organ, but don't get round to signing up, potentially because they don't think about sort of death, especially when they're younger. And I feel as though if we are to get the opt-out system into place, then that will potentially help bridge that gap.
I mean, Claire, you're shaking your head ferociously.
Nodding.
That is, nodding and shaking her head that way. Really quickly, what do you have to say on that?
So I would agree entirely. So we know consistently, the surveys say over 80% of the population support organ donation, and yet only around 35% of the population have actually taken that step to sign on to the organ donor register. So it is a potential solution, and anything that gets people talking about it, making their wishes known, is to be welcomed.
Okay, well, Claire Winnemont, Ali Golian and Edwin Yamwa, thank you all so much for joining us tonight on 5 News Tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
But if you like